Welcome to Washington Today on C-SPAN Radio for Friday, December 8th, 2023. The U.S. vetoes the United Nations Security Council resolution that called for a humanitarian ceasefire in the war between Israel and Hamas. The United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres says the people of Gaza are looking into the abyss. But the Deputy U.S. Ambassador to the UN, Robert Wood, said a ceasefire would only plant the seeds for the next war because Hamas has no desire to see a durable peace. Criticism mounting against the presidents of Harvard University, MIT, and the University of Pennsylvania for not condemning antisemitism on campus. They testified before a House committee earlier this week. We will hear about the controversy from the presidents of two more schools, James Madison University and DePauw University. Russian President Vladimir Putin says he'll be running for re-election in March 2024. He has served for longer than any other Russian ruler as head of Russia, except Joseph Stalin. White House press secretary is asked about the latest criminal indictments against the president's son, Hunter Biden, on tax charges. November jobs report out from the Labor Department, the U.S. adding 199,000 jobs, the unemployment rate dropping from 3.9% to 3.7%. And a bipartisan U.S. Senate delegation lands in Dubai for the United Nations Climate Summit. Reuters reporting the United States on Friday vetoed a United Nations Security Council demand for an immediate humanitarian ceasefire in the war between Israel and Palestinian militant group Hamas in Gaza, diplomatically isolating Washington as it shields its ally. 13 Security Council members voted in favor of a brief draft resolution put forward by the United Arab Emirates, while Britain abstained. The vote came after UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres made a rare move on Wednesday to formally warn the 15-member council of a global threat from the 2-month-long war. The United States and Israel oppose a ceasefire because they believe it would only benefit Hamas. Washington instead supports pauses in fighting to protect civilians and allow the release of hostages taken by Hamas in a deadly October 7th attack on Israel. That was from Reuters. Here is the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres at the Security Council meeting today, talking about the rarely used power called Article 99.
I wrote to the Security Council invoking Article 99 because we are at a breaking point. There is a high risk of the total collapse of the humanitarian support system in Gaza, which would have devastating consequences. We anticipate that it would result in a complete breakdown of public order and increased pressure for mass displacement into Egypt. I fear the consequences could be devastating for the security of the entire region. We have already seen the spillover in the occupied West Bank, Lebanon, Syria, Iraq, and Yemen. There is clearly, in my view, a serious risk of aggravating existing threats to the maintenance of international peace and security. The risk of collapse of the humanitarian system is fundamentally linked with the complete lack of safety and security for our staff in Gaza and with the nature and intensity of military operations which are severely limiting access to people in desperate need. The threat to the safety and security of United Nations staff in Gaza is unprecedented. More than 130 of my colleagues have already been killed, many with their families.
UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres at today's Security Council meeting in New York City. He went on to describe in detail the conditions in Gaza, destroyed houses, lack of food, what he said was the imminent collapse of the healthcare system, and then he officially called for a ceasefire.
Everything I just described represents an unprecedented situation that led to my unprecedented decision to invoke Article 99, urging the members of the Security Council to press to avert a humanitarian catastrophe and appealing for a humanitarian ceasefire to be declared. Mr. President, we are all aware that Israel began its military operations in response to the brutal terror attacks unleashed by Hamas and other Palestinian armed groups on 7 October. I unreservedly condemn those attacks, and I'm appalled by the reports of sexual violence. There is no possible justification for deliberately killing some 1,200 people, including 33 children, injuring thousands more and taking hundreds of hostages. Some 130 hostages are still held captive, and I call for their immediate and unconditional release, as well as their humane treatment and visits from the international community of the Red Cross until they are freed. At the same time, the brutality perpetrated by Hamas can never justify the collective punishment of the Palestinian people. And while indiscriminate rocket fire by Hamas into Israel and the use of civilians as human shields are in contravention with the laws of war, such conduct does not absolve Israel on its own violations. International humanitarian law includes the duty to protect civilians and to comply with the principles of distinction, proportionality, and precaution. The laws of war also demand that civilians' essential needs must be met, including by facilitating the unimpeded delivery of humanitarian relief.
United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres at the UN Security Council meeting in New York City. The statement at the meeting by the United States was given by the Deputy Ambassador, Robert Wood.
For the past 2 months, this Council has been engaged in continuous meetings on the topics highlighted in your recent letter. In parallel, and even as we have supported the right of another member state to defend its people against heinous atrocities and acts of terrorism, the United States, at the highest levels, has undertaken intensive diplomacy to save lives and lay a foundation for a durable peace. American diplomacy opened the way for the first trucks that flowed into Gaza with aid. In partnership with Qatar and Egypt, it helped reunite more than 100 hostages with their loved ones and dramatically expanded aid to civilians in Gaza during a 7-day-long humanitarian pause. Hamas, however, has a different set of goals. Its refusal to release young women hostages led to a breakdown in the pause and resumption of the fighting. This Council's failure to condemn Hamas's October 7 terrorist attacks, including its acts of sexual violence and other unthinkable evils, is a serious moral failure. And it underscores the fundamental disconnect between the discussions that we have been having in this chamber and the realities on the ground. An undeniable part of that reality is that if Israel unilaterally laid down its weapons today, as some member states have called for, Hamas would continue to hold hostages, women and children, elderly men, many of whom, according to survivor accounts, are being subjected to cruel and inhumane treatment. And as of today, Hamas continues to pose a threat to Israel and remain in charge of Gaza. That is not a threat that any one of our governments would allow to continue to remain on our own borders. Not after the worst attack on our people in several decades. For that reason, while the United States strongly supports a durable peace in which both Israelis and Palestinians can live in peace and security, we do not support calls for an immediate ceasefire. This would only plant the seeds for the next war, because Hamas has no desire to see a durable peace, to see a two-state solution.
Robert Wood is the Deputy Ambassador to the United Nations from the United States at today's UN Security Council meeting at the UN in New York City. The vote on the resolution calling for a ceasefire offered by United Arab Emirates was 13 in favor, 1 against, the United States, and 1 abstention, United Kingdom. The U.S. is one of 5 permanent members of the UN Security Council, and a no vote by one of those members is a veto of the resolution, so it did not pass. In Washington, D.C., before that UN Security Council vote, the foreign ministers of Saudi Arabia, Egypt, Jordan, and Qatar were at the Woodrow Wilson International Center for Scholars ahead of a meeting with Secretary of State Antony Blinken. The Saudi Foreign Minister, Faisal bin Farhan Al Saud, talked about what they were seeking from the U.S.
We're now at, I think, 17,000 civilians killed, more than half of them children. And our message has been very clear. There needs to be an immediate ceasefire, there needs to be a cessation of hostilities, and we need to have immediate access for humanitarian aid. It is not acceptable that the civilians of Gaza are paying the price for what happened on 7th of October. It is not acceptable that humanitarian aid is being used as a tool of leverage or punishment for the population of Gaza, and we have had a very, very strong message to all of our international partners that this needs to stop. We are continuing to see, unfortunately, significant military operations that are far in excess of what is justifiable, and that clearly are going beyond what international humanitarian law allows, and that are continuing to kill civilians by the hour. And our message is that the fighting has to stop now, and that's the only way we are going to be able to engage to talk about what comes next, what is the future, not just of Gaza, because in our opinion it needs to be a conversation about what is the future of Palestine, because the only way that we will ensure security for all of us in the region, Palestinians, Israelis, neighboring states, is through a pathway to a two-state solution that gives security to all. So that's our message, and we have had some good conversations with our partners, but unfortunately there is still not enough action by the international community. We have a vote today in the United Nations Security Council that would call for an immediate humanitarian ceasefire. It does not look like that will pass, because some permanent members may take a position against it. This is to us unfathomable. We don't understand why it is so hard to call for a ceasefire. This is what usually in conflicts such as this that we have seen around the world, where civilian deaths, civilian casualties have been far outpacing any justifiable military means, that has always been what the international community has rallied around, to stop the fighting. In this case, why is it not the same? This is not acceptable, and we've had already one resolution at the Security Council calling for humanitarian pauses that has not been implemented. So not enough is being done, and we are very, very disappointed that not enough is being done. We are disappointed with the international community and the security structures, including the United Nations Security Council, for not living up to its responsibilities and its mandate.
The Saudi Arabian Foreign Minister Faisal bin Farhan Al Saud, part of a delegation to Washington on a panel at the Wilson Center in Washington, D.C. Also, they're the foreign ministers of Egypt, Jordan, and Qatar. They were sent by OIC, the Organization of Islamic Cooperation. From the New York Times, Israeli forces struck hundreds of targets across the Gaza Strip over the past 24 hours as troops pushed deeper into the embattled enclave the Israeli military said on Friday morning, while scores of Palestinian civilians sought shelter in rapidly shrinking areas designated as safe. The Israeli military said its aircraft had targeted what it said were numerous terrorists in a 2-hour series of strikes in Khan Yunis, the southern city that has become a focus of fighting. At least 3 of the Gazans were struck by an Israeli drone, the military said. In a video statement distributed by the Israeli military on Friday, Brigadier General Dan Golfus, who is commanding troops in Khan Yunis, said his forces were, quote, moving from tunnel to tunnel, house to house. That reporting from the New York Times. A spokesperson for the White House National Security Council, John Kirby, spoke about the war as he talked with reporters on Air Force One.
Have the officials been receptive to calls for strikes to be more precise? Have they made any adjustments, as far as you know, accordingly?
I would just say that, again, we've been talking to the Israelis about deliberate and precise targeting for quite some time, and as we've been saying in the last few days, they have been receptive to our input, and they have, in fact, taken some steps to try to be more careful. For instance, their movement into Gaza and North Gaza was smaller than originally planned, and some of that is based on some counsel and perspective that we share. We sent over some military officers who had experience in Mosul, Fallujah, urban warfare in that environment. And we believe that the Israelis took those lessons learned on board. Just in the last few days, they're dropping leaflets, they're publishing a map of areas where people can go and not go. That is the definition for a military of telegraphing your punches, and not a lot of modern militaries would do that. Now, Secretary Blinken has spoken very, very frankly to this, including just yesterday. We certainly all recognize more can be done to try to to reduce civilian casualties, and we're going to keep working with our Israeli counterparts to that end.
John Kirby, Strategic Communications Coordinator for the White House National Security Council, speaking with reporters on Air Force One. This is Washington Today. From Associated Press, Harvard University's president apologized as pressures mounted for the University of Pennsylvania's president to resign over their testimony at a congressional hearing on anti-Semitism that critics from the White House on down say failed to show that they would stand up to anti-Semitism on campus. In an interview Thursday with the Crimson Student newspaper, Harvard President Claudine Gay said she got caught up in a heated exchange at the House committee hearing and failed to properly denounce threats of violence against Jewish students. Meanwhile, lawyers for a major donor to Penn, Ross Stevens, wrote to Penn's general counsel on Thursday to threaten to withdraw a gift valued at $100 million because of the university's stance on anti-Semitism on campus unless Penn President Liz McGill is replaced. That from Associated Press. The presidents of two more universities, Lori White of DePauw and Jonathan Alger of James Madison, gave their views on the controversy during a panel discussion on higher education today, hosted by American Enterprise Institute.
Let's start by being clear that anti-Semitism, Islamophobia, racism, harassment against an individual because of the identities that they hold has no place on our college campuses. We all agree with those values. And I'd like to start in response to your question by talking about how I have come to view the critical issues of freedom of expression on our campuses, and why I am so excited to be a part of Citizens and Scholars and working with Raj and John and other college presidents. So just real quickly, I grew up in San Francisco, California, in a wonderfully diverse, multi-religious, multiracial, multi-ethnic neighborhood. I thought the whole world was like my neighborhood in San Francisco until I went away to college and I realized that it was not. And, sadly, we are living in a society that is resegregated by race, by ethnicity, by economics, by religion. And, one of the first places that our students encounter difference is on our college campuses. And so there's no wonder there are some challenges there. And we can come back to that point that I just made. Secondly, I went to UC Berkeley as an undergraduate on the tail end of the free speech movement. And of course, they say, those who remember the free speech movement weren't really there, but I was there a little bit after. And so I do remember. But what I most remember are the principles of free speech. And if we think about what was happening in the 1960s, it was really about stifling the speech of young people, of college students who wanted to advocate against the Vietnam War, who wanted to advocate for the civil rights movement, and administrators trying to find out ways to squash the free speech of students. The third is that as I have worked in higher education, this is now my 42nd year. One of the things that I have observed, and you mentioned this, Rick, in your introduction, is that we are not giving students the tools to be able to engage in rich debate and discussion. And if we can't figure out a strategy to be able to help students develop the tools to be able to engage in this type of dialogue that they don't see many adults role modeling for them, then, what are the principles of higher education? And so I will stop there. And I'm sure my colleague John wants to jump in.
Thanks, Lori. And let me agree as a starting point with what Lori has just stated, and that is there are a couple of values that are fundamental in higher education that are at stake here. One is the importance of freedom of speech as an absolute starting point, right? Freedom of speech and academic freedom undergird our educational mission. So they're absolutely essential values in American higher education. I'm at the university named for the father of the Constitution, and that means something to us in terms of our DNA. And we talk about this a lot with students. The other value, though, is freedom from discrimination and harassment, right? And how do you balance those things? So Lori, you shared some of your biography. My friends like to say I'm a recovering lawyer, but that is my training and background. And I've worked previously in my career at the American Association of University Professors, which of course cares deeply about academic freedom in higher education for faculty and for students, but also in the U.S. Department of Education's Office for Civil Rights, which applies the discrimination statutes that apply in higher education. So it's been an interesting career to sort of think about those strands and how they come together and how you draw those lines. And a couple quick thoughts. One is that everybody favors free speech as long as they agree with it, right? But the real challenging tests come when you get close to these lines, when it's controversial and hard. And secondly, I think it's important for us to remember that in higher education, we should expect that there are going to be controversies and controversial speech. Our mission is messy. The educational mission, by definition, is bringing diverse people, diverse perspectives together to be shared, debated, discussed. And the question is, how do you help students develop those civic muscles to do this well in community with each other to create a learning environment in which everybody can participate and be heard? So that's the big challenge I think that we face as educators. And Rick, to your point about the challenges we face on campus, we did our own campus survey a few years ago, and we got the same results that you'd heard, where a lot of the students said they were afraid to speak up at times, and it wasn't because of their faculty, it was actually because they were afraid of offending fellow students. It was sort of like the Thanksgiving table discussion, right? Don't bring up politics or religion with your relatives. And so that was something we really took to heart. And part of the reason that we joined the campus call with Raj and Lori and others was we thought, we really need to work on these civic muscles with our students to help them to understand, look, we want you to be able to debate and disagree and hear controversial and different points of view you might not agree with, but also to learn from and with each other. So how do you do that? That's the hard work that we've been engaged with and working with Raj and others on that.
Jonathan Alger is president of James Madison University. You also heard from Lori White, president of DePauw University, at a virtual discussion hosted by the American Enterprise Institute. And they referenced two others taking part, Rajiv Vinakoda, Institute for Citizens and Scholars president, and the moderator, Frederick Hess, AEI Education Policy Studies Director. You can find the full video of this event at our website, cspan.org. Russian President Vladimir Putin announcing today that he's going to run for re-election in Russia's March 2024 elections. He was president from 2000 through 2008, and then the Russian Constitution at the time prevented him from seeking a third consecutive four-year term. He ran again and regained the presidency in 2012. And in 2021, signed a law allowing him to run for two more six-year terms, potentially extending his rule until 2036. President Putin made this announcement while taking questions after a ceremony at the Kremlin in Moscow, giving awards to Ukrainian war veterans.
The Federation Council has announced presidential election next year, and on behalf of our people, on behalf of the Donbass, of the newly liberated lands, I'd like to ask you to participate in that election. We have got a lot of work to do, and thanks to your decision, we now are free to choose, and we would like to participate in the next presidential election. We'd like to vote. There's a lot of work to be done. We need to integrate into Russia, to socially adapt to this new situation, and return to normal, peaceful life. And we'd like to do that under your leadership. You are our president, and we are your team. We need you for Russia. And thank you. Truth be told, I've had different thoughts at different times, but at this time, I must say that I will stand with the people. I will run for re-election.
Russian President Vladimir Putin through an interpreter in Moscow. John Kirby, spokesperson for the White House National Security Council, asked for a reaction.
Vladimir Putin, what's your comment on the Russian president going for re-election?
Well, it's going to be one humdinger of a horse race, isn't it? That's all I got to say on that.
The Russian presidential election in March 2024 will be the first in which residents of the occupied Ukrainian regions of Donetsk, Luhansk, Zaporizhia, and Kherson, annexed by Russia during its war against Ukraine, will be taking part. The director of the U.S. National Security Agency, General Paul Nakasone, talking today about the debate over reauthorizing the spy tool in Section 702 of the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, or FISA. It allows surveillance of non-U.S. citizens located outside the United States without a warrant. And Section 702 is set to expire at the end of the month.
702 is the most important authority that we utilize day in and day out. It is essential for the defense of our nation and the protection of our people. Now, as we think about 702, let's take a step back. It is obviously the government's ability to collect information on foreign targets operating outside the United States that are utilizing U.S. commercial services like telephone or email. It is absolutely critical in terms of what we can do to be able to understand the scope, scale, and sophistication of the threat, whether or not that's being able to identify fentanyl users that are providing that just disastrous chemical into the United States, or whether or not it's being able to provide insights on what's happening to hostages in Gaza. This is the authority that is so essential for our nation. I would also tell you that it's also the authority, as has been identified by a series of commissions, as the most transparent surveillance authority our nation has. As the director of the National Security Agency, I would tell you that our focus is not only national security, it's also the protection of our civil liberties and privacy. This is an authority with the oversight and the transparency that allows both of those things to occur.
And I think the report that was done by the President's Intelligence Advisory Board showed that it is about the protection of civil liberties. There is the oversight that occurs.
And I think, Tish, as we come back to that, I think that was a very critical report, but it's also 59% of the presidential's daily book is based upon 702 authorities. 20% of our entire collection at NSA is obviously focused based upon what 702 allows us, and then the ability for us to have an insight of what's going on rapidly. If something occurs, we turn to 702. It is that important for our nation.
And we have Paul Abbott, the Deputy Director of the FBI, here with us this morning as well. I think he would say the same thing.
I think so. And, I think if you take a look at it from the perspective of NSA or CIA or the National Counterterrorism Center or the FBI, I mean, Paul would certainly, back us up in terms of what we need to be able to do is to have insight and be able to provide indications and warning, and then be able to also provide, obviously, the warnings to people that maybe, have been attacked in cyberspace. This is something that 702 allows us to do.
So what happens if it doesn't get reauthorized?
So it will be reauthorized, Tish. I'm confident this is what our community is focused on. This is what the Congress is focused on. We will continue to work on it. It's one of the things that we do day in and day out. It is our number one priority.
General Paul Nakasone, National Security Agency Director and U.S. Cyber Command Commander, interviewed by Letitia Long, Intelligence and National Security Alliance Board Chair and former Director of the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency in the Obama administration. This was hosted by INSA today in Arlington, Virginia. A 4-month extension of Section 702 through April 2024 without changes, without reforms, has been included in the annual defense policy bill that will be voted on next week by the House and Senate. This week, 2 House committees, the Intelligence Committee and Judiciary Committee, approved different 5-year reauthorizations of Section 702 with reforms designed to prevent the FBI from using this authority to spy on American citizens. Washington Today continues in a moment.
We want to take a minute to ask for your help. Your financial support will ensure that C-SPAN can continue to produce podcasts that inform you about national politics, introduce you to the latest nonfiction books, and provide valuable historical context to today's news. Make a donation today and be a part of C-SPAN's future. Visit c-span.org/donate.
Welcome back to Washington Today, available as a podcast on the free C-SPAN Now mobile app and wherever you find your podcasts. The White House Press Secretary Karine Jean-Piere was asked today about the news that broke late Thursday night of the indictment of President Biden's son, Hunter Biden, in California on 9 tax charges, 3 felonies and 6 misdemeanors. Associated Press writes that Special Counsel David Weiss said in a statement that Hunter Biden spent millions of dollars on an extravagant lifestyle rather than paying his bills. The charges are centered on at least $1.4 million in taxes Hunter Biden owed between 2016 and 19, a period where he has acknowledged struggling with addiction, and the back taxes have since been paid. The charging documents filed in California, where he lives, detail spending on drugs, strippers, luxury hotels, and exotic cars, and prosecutor Leo Wise writing, in short, everything but his taxes. If convicted, Hunter Biden could receive a maximum 17 years in prison. That was from Associated Press. Here's Press Secretary Karine Jean-Piere taking questions from reporters on Air Force One.
I have two questions on the Hunter Biden case. Any reaction to to what we saw last night, new charges, and then I have a follow-up.
Sure. Look, I mean, the president has said this before, and he will continue to say, which is that he loves his son and supports him as he continues to rebuild his life. I'm going to be really careful and not comment on this and refer you to Department of Justice or my colleagues at the White House Counsel, but that's what I'm not going to go beyond telling you all what the president has said over and over again. He's proud of his son, and he is him building his life back up.
I know he wants charges directly, but can you speak at least to the emotional toll the charges are having on the president?
I'm just not going to comment beyond what I just shared.
Are they speaking to each other?
I'm not going to, and we've been pretty consistent on this, I'm not going to comment on private conversation that the president has with his family members.
One more on this, only because you've said it before, I just want to re-up in light of these new charges. You've said before that the president would not pardon his son. Is that still the case?
Nothing has changed. That is still the case.
White House Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre with reporters on Air Force One, flying with the president from Washington to Las Vegas today. Congressman Brian Stile, Republican from Wisconsin, asked about the Hunter Biden tax indictments in California in an interview this morning on Fox News Channel.
Well, I think what we see is that the Biden family continues to have a ton of evidence of foreign peddling, and then the question becomes, was President Biden trading any government favors on behalf of the foreign business dealings of his families? It's why the impeachment proceedings that will likely be moving before the House in the near future are actually needed to make sure that we're getting the answers for the American people. It provides us a pathway to make sure that the executive branch doesn't claim executive privilege where the American people deserve to know the answer. And so I think we're going to see this move forward. It opens up an opportunity to really just show the American people exactly what's going on, and I think people have a right to know.
Yeah, I know, but is it not true that the IRS, the FBI, the DOJ knew all of this now for a long time? They've been sitting on this potential indictment. Why do they release it now, 3 days before Hunter Biden is expected to testify behind closed doors for even bigger crimes, and that is influence peddling and money laundering and bribery? Does this now stop him, prevent him from testifying on Wednesday, and is this a further cover-up?
I don't know the reasons for the timing at the Department of Justice. Hopefully, we are actually in a position to provide more insight to the American people. It would be incredibly frustrating if this is a move by the DOJ to simply stonewall Congress trying to get the answers for the American people. At the end of the day, the American people deserve to know the answer about the business dealings of the Biden administration, but really it's whether or not the president was trading favors in the benefit of the family business dealings. They're arguing that these are standard loans between family members. I don't think there's a lot of American families out there that have family members making thousands and thousands of dollars from foreign businesses where they don't have expertise in, that are then simply turning around and loaning those money to other family members. Sounds suspect. I think the American people deserve the right to know.
Congressman Brian Stile, Republican from Wisconsin, on Fox Business Channel this morning. Again, from the Associated Press story, the new charges filed Thursday are in addition to federal firearms charges in Delaware alleging Hunter Biden broke laws against drug users having guns in 2018. They come after the implosion of a plea deal over the summer that would have spared him jail time, putting the case on track to a possible trial as his father campaigns for re-election. A federal appeals court on Friday, writes CBS, reinstated key aspects of a gag order limiting what former President Donald Trump can say in the case involving his alleged attempts to thwart the transfer of power from the 2020 presidential election. The unanimous three-judge panel for the U.S. Court of Appeals for the District of Columbia Circuit upheld the order from U.S. District Judge Tanya Chutkan to the extent that it prohibits the former president from making public statements about potential witnesses in the case, quote, concerning their potential participation in the investigation or this criminal proceeding. He's also barred from commenting about lawyers in the case other than the special counsel, members of court staff and lawyer staff, and their family members. Trump can, however, make statements criticizing the Biden administration, the Justice Department, and special counsel Jack Smith. He can also continue claiming that the prosecution is politically motivated and that he is innocent of the 4 charges against him. That reporting from CBS. This article from Yahoo Finance. The unemployment rate unexpectedly fell in November, reflecting signs that the labor market may not be cooling as quickly as many had initially thought. Data from the Bureau of Labor Statistics released on Friday show the unemployment rate was 3.7% for the month, down from 3.9% in October. The U.S. economy added 199,000 jobs in November, an uptick from the 150,000 the previous month, as striking auto workers and Hollywood actors came back to the workforce. That was from Yahoo Finance. The acting Labor Secretary, Julie Su, was on Bloomberg television this morning.
On the surface, it looks great. This is from Capital Economics this morning. The response from them this morning, just going beneath the surface, respectable organisations saying this. The 199 increase in November payroll employment included 47,000 workers returning from strikes. Stripping out that one-off boost, the 152 gain was roughly the same as the muted increase in October. Moreover, of that 152, 49,000 were government jobs, a further 77k in healthcare. Excluding those non-cyclical sectors, the economy added only 26,000 jobs, which adds to the evidence that after a very strong third quarter, growth is slowing to a crawl in the fourth quarter. Judy, what would you make of that?
I think what we're seeing is, again, we look at overall trends in the economy. We've seen job growth at record rates, certainly faster than anybody predicted coming out of the pandemic. But it wasn't just like, one-time boost in the immediate post-pandemic months. It's been year-over-year growth. We're also seeing it across numerous industries, and we're seeing it in, overall, right? Over 800,000 jobs created in construction, over 600,000 in manufacturing since President Biden came into office. And yes, we also saw workers come back on the payroll after strikes that resulted in record wage increases and other kinds of benefits, retirement benefits, health benefits that we really associate with what we want for working people, right? It's what gives families a sense of security. It's what gives individuals what the president always talks about, which is some breathing room. And that's the kind of economy that we want to build, that we are seeing. We have more work to do, and we'll continue to build on the progress that we've made. Many of the investments that the president has helped to make possible are showing up in communities. 40,000 some infrastructure projects across 4,500 communities all across the country, but we're just beginning with that. And so we'll continue to see more of that, and the jobs numbers are just another indicator of that growth and what its impact means.
Acting Labor Secretary Julie Su interviewed on Bloomberg television this morning. Senator John Kennedy, Republican from Louisiana, posting on X today, Kevin paid $19.80 to buy milk, bread, toilet paper, laundry detergent, fabric softener, cling wrap, mac and cheese, a TV dinner, OJ, and a bag of plastic army men when Home Alone debuted. The same items now cost families $72.28, thanks to hashtag Bidenflation. On Wall Street, the Dow up 130, Nasdaq up 63, S&P up 18. President Biden today announcing $8.2 billion for 10 passenger rail projects around the country, including a high-speed rail system connecting Nevada and California. He was in Las Vegas for the announcement. The money is coming from the bipartisan infrastructure law, which provides $66 billion for rail. White House says the president will also be meeting with members of the University of Nevada, Las Vegas after the mass shooting this week, offering condolences and advocating for more gun violence prevention measures. A bipartisan U.S. Senate congressional delegation, CODEL, traveling to Dubai, United Arab Emirates, for the 2023 United Nations Climate Change Conference, also called COP28, which is the conference of the parties of the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change. This year's conference started November 30th, runs through December 12th. The Senate delegation held a teleconference today, led by Senator Ben Cardin, Democrat from Maryland, Foreign Relations Committee Chair.
We're here because we know we need action. We're very concerned about the fact that we have missed a lot of our targets. We are in crisis right now, and we have to mitigate as much as possible the damage we're doing as far as greenhouse emissions, and we have to adapt to the reality of where we are today. I want to tell you, just as a member, as chair of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, there are many reasons to be concerned. One, of course, is the environment, our responsibility to the environment. but we're also seeing from climate the danger of stability of countries and large number of migrants. That affects our national security. So yes, this is an environmental issue, but it's also a national security issue. In COP28, the goals are to take a stock take of the global, how close we are to the global commitments that were made in Paris, and to recognize that we're going to need to adjust our climate targets in order to be able to save the planet. We will also be talking about the loss and damage issues, and I know that the U.S. delegation is going to be very actively engaged. I want to make one comment before turning it over, and that is, yes, there's a lot of concentration on the Green Climate Fund and the loss and damage fund. But let's be clear what the United States has already done. We've contributed $1 billion to the Green Climate Fund, and if you take a look at what we've done in just the last 2 years, in our USAID programs, what we've done in our Development Financing Corporation programs, what we've done with the Millennium Challenge Corporation in the last 2 years alone, we have contributed about $8.5 billion, that's with a B. So we have no apologies to make as to what the United States has done, but we recognize the crisis is so severe, we need to do more. Everyone needs to do more. And we're coming here with an agenda to work with the international community to deal with deforestation, to deal with our oceans, to deal with food insecurities. There's a lot of things that we can do in order to make greater progress in dealing with this crisis.
Senator Ben Cardin, Democrat from Maryland, on a teleconference from Dubai, the site of the climate conference. He is leading a bipartisan delegation. Other Democratic senators joining him: Tom Carper, Sheldon Whitehouse, Chris Coons, Ed Markey, and Brian Schatz. And there is a Republican as well on the trip, Lisa Murkowski of Alaska, who spoke to reporters.
I'm going to be looking at opportunities over these next couple of days to engage in further discussions about the implications and what it means to see this accelerated rate of climate impact on our Arctic nations. To the point that the chairman has made about the U.S. investments, I think it's critically important that we do appreciate the level to which the United States has made investments. And it's not just the Green Bank, Global Green Bank Fund. There is so much that we have done in recent years, everything from beginning with the Energy Act to the bipartisan infrastructure bill, to the Chips and Science Act, and moving forward to the Inflation Reduction Act. So the investments have been good. They've been significant. My purpose here in being in an oil-producing state, which is the UAE, coming from an oil-producing state in the Arctic, Alaska, is again to share some notes about how we can ensure that as we're working to reduce emissions, working to help on a more broad global basis, that we do not jeopardize those who are most energy poor. And I will just state, well, the loss and damage fund is significant. I think we also need to recognize that we have people in the Arctic, in my state, who are suffering significantly and who are wondering how they deal with relocation, how they deal with permafrost thaw.
Senator Lisa Murkowski, Republican from Alaska, on today's virtual news conference with the other senators in Dubai for the UN Climate Summit. There's also a reported U.S. House bipartisan congressional delegation going to the summit. New York Times has an article: at the annual UN Climate Summit, governments are supposed to reach a consensus around how to avert catastrophic climate change. So far, they can't even agree on where to hold next year's conference. Tensions over Russia's war in Ukraine have hampered the ability of diplomats meeting in UAE for this year's summit to find a location for 2024. Under UN rules, location of the summit rotates among regions, and countries within those regions must agree on the host. Next year, it's scheduled to take place in Eastern Europe or the Caucasus, both of which have been battered by war. Russia has blocked nearly every viable candidate in the region, effectively holding next year's event hostage. They're reporting from the New York Times. The 124th meeting of football rivals Army and Navy is Saturday at Gillette Stadium in Foxborough, Massachusetts. Today, Congressman Pat Ryan, Democrat from New York, rooting for Army, made a friendly wager with Congressman Chris DeLuzio, Democrat from Pennsylvania, who's rooting for Navy.
Congressman Pat Ryan here. I have the incredible honor of representing the United States Military Academy at West Point and the Army football team, and I have a challenge to issue to my colleague, Navy grad Chris DeLuzio. Army is going to crush Navy tomorrow in this football game, and on the small chance that you guys somehow manage to win, I'd be willing to wager a six-pack of beer from our district. We make some of the best beer in the country, but I am confident that I'll be drinking a delicious six-pack of beer from your district, Chris. Go Army, beat Navy.
Pat Ryan, I accept your bet. Proud Navy alum, of course, the midshipmen are going to take it to the cadets this weekend. Look forward to drinking the Hudson Valley's best. I'll offer up a Yinzer delicacy, rack of irons. Go Navy, beat Army.
Congressman Chris DeLuzio and Congressman Pat Ryan videos posted today on X. If Army beats Navy, Army will claim the Commander-in-Chief's trophy, which is awarded to the Service Academy with the best record in the games among Army, Navy, and Air Force. If Navy beats Army, there's a three-way tie for the trophy, and the 2022 champion Air Force gets to keep it another year. Thanks for listening to Washington Today. Sign up for C-SPAN's free evening newsletter word for word and get the stories making headlines in Washington emailed to you every day. Subscribe at cspan.org/connect. Have a good night and weekend.